It's
A little bit longer there.
Yeah, you're welcome to.
Right?
You like my notes, though?
I do know that.
You run a tag team if you want this, Seth.
Yeah. Please.
So good evening, everyone,
Trial here, what's going on?
and welcome. This is the
WWE.
third or fourth time we've been getting together, third time we've been going on the budget stuff. So I'm really glad that you all could be here to join us, and so we can have an opportunity to kind of go through where we are, where we've been, and where we're headed. And right now, I can tell you that where we've been to where we are now is extraordinary, because if we look, if you'll see as we go through the numbers tonight, we had sat down in 2018 and mapped out where we were supposed to be for FY21, and you'll be surprised at how close we were. That's something you don't normally see, where there's always a margin of error to a certain degree, but it was actually very, very slim. So I think you'll be surprised to see that, so, yes.
We should,
Without further ado, I'd like to have all the boards call their meetings to order, and we'll do that first.
I call, or make a motion to call the Board of Selectmen for the town of Foxborough to order.
Second.
all those in favor?
Second.
School committee?
Could I get a motion to open our meeting?
Motion to open the meeting? Second.
The school committee meeting from, what is today? February
The
25th
25th,
at
yeah.
7:30 is now.
Is in order.
Is in order.
One vacation?
Advisory committee,
And the advisory committee.
call to order this meeting of the advisory committee.
Great, all right, thank you all very much. So, so I'm really glad that you're all here, because I think it'll hopefully clarify a few things for you tonight. Certainly you'll have an opportunity to ask some questions later on, but earlier today, we had a very, I think, very productive meeting with Standard & Poor's on our bond rating for the upcoming bond issue for the borough school and for the water treatment facilities, and that seemed to go very well. So this is sort of like, that was sort of like a dry run for this meeting tonight, so this is sort of like run number 2, so we'll see how this goes, all right? So we want to start off tonight by first going through the financial policies that we've put in place since 2016. The financial policy sort of gives you the roadmap as to what we're supposed to be doing in terms of setting up our budgets and setting up our capital spending and all the things that we do here in town. And it's made up of several different specific guidelines that we try to follow. So if you take a look at, you break them down, the first is the unassigned unreserved fund balance. We try to maintain a fund balance of 7.5%, and that's 7.5% of our budgets. And if you take a look at that amount right now, we're up at 8.96%. So we're well in excess of that amount right now. We actually were higher than that number earlier before we did the borough school. We were about $4 million higher than that, actually, in that amount. And we actually explained that to Standard & Poor's today, because they were wondering why we drew down on that amount. But that was a planned drawdown based on the fact we put that money aside for that purpose. And by doing it that way, we were able to get the money down to a point where we could actually fit the debt service into the existing tax rate. So the long and short of that is that we were able to borrow that for that project within the existing tax rate, and not have to do a debt exclusion, which actually is a tax savings to all the taxpayers of the community. So it was a rather significant thing, it's a rather significant accomplishment for the town, because I don't think I've ever seen that done with a school project. I've seen it done with other projects, but not necessarily a school project. So congratulations to all of you for doing that. The free cash subcomponent of the unreserved fund balance is at 4.76. Our current balance is at 4.14. And that's actually pretty close to where we've been. We're tracking for the past several years. So we're not really off that mark very much at all. We used $621,000 at the special town meeting, and that was to pay for a couple items that were in that particular project. $250,000 of that went back into the capital stabilization account, which we were able to talk about today as well, with Standard & Poor's indicating that even though we drew money down out of that account, we put money back into it. So they were very pleased to hear that we were doing that. As far as the fund stabilization, the stabilization fund balance is, so we try to maintain it at 5%, where our current percentage is 5.4%. So we maintain a stabilization fund balance of 3.816%, 3.816 million. And we're actually proposing to put another $100,000 in the budget this year, which will keep that going in the right direction. So the capital stabilization fund balance, the minimum is 100,000 with a goal of 1 million. Don't forget, we just drew down on that account to actually pay for the school, but we put 250,000 into it, so now we have a total of 280,000 in that account, and we're going to continue to grow that as we go forward. Our recommendation to you all is that you don't put any more money into that until you recertify your free cash for next year. So we'll probably take a look at that again for another fall town meeting consideration to see if we can put some more money back into that account again. All right? The overlay reserve fund is $440,000 per fiscal year. That's our guideline tells us. And that our overlay reserve actually right now is $1.1 million. So we're actually in excess of where that amount is right now. And that's, we try to use somewhere in the order of about $500,000 each year for that. But also what happens is then you can free that money up and you can use that for expenditures, or even make it fall to free cash as well. So it's another reserve fund another savings account that we can actually use. What's important about that point, though, is that we actually take $1.1 million off the table for spending right out of the gate. So we actually limit ourselves in terms of what we can do. I'll talk about another $1.1 million savings later on that actually does the same exact thing. So we kind of limit our ability to spend where we should be, what we think what we can do. The reserve fund is set at $75,000. We usually have it no less than $50,000 and no greater than 1% of the previous year's taxes. So we set that at $75,000. We've had that same number for the past, I don't know, all the time I've been here, 6 years at least. So it may be even longer. Unfunded liabilities and pension our FY 2020 funding is $4,844,077, and based on the latest analysis, and which is a handout, you'll see that we're going to be fully funded by 2029. And what's significant about that, and this is something that St. Paul's was actually very thrilled to hear, by the way, is that by being fully funded in 2029, that means we can then take whatever money we've been spending on that amount and then put it towards our OPEB liability, which is expected to be funded by 2035. If we do that, what we should be able to do is to pay off the OPEB liability by 2032, which means it will be reducing that long-term liability, which will help us in terms of what we can do. And if we do both of those, both of our major long-term liabilities will be expunged at that point. That frees up a lot of additional money that can be used towards the operating budget, but then the other thought would be, if we wanted to, we could actually pay down some of our debt. So then you would actually be eliminating a lot of your long-term liabilities by doing that. Right? So unfunded liabilities, OPEB, we actually fund about a little under $1.1 million for the OPEB liability, and that will set the amount at on 6/30/2020 as being $10,802,402, and that will be again fully funded in 2035.
Bill,
Yes.
for those of us who don't live this stuff every day,
Sure.
Is it worthwhile to take 2 seconds on each one and say what it's used for?
Okay.
I'm not sure. I don't remember half of it.
Sure, okay, that's fine, that's good. Thank you for raising that, so that's a good point. So the unassigned reserve fund balance is money that we're typically not using towards the budgets, whatever is money that's left over in the funding process throughout the year. So money that we don't use, a lot of it falls to free cash, some of it goes into other stabilization accounts, things that we don't, so we try to maintain a certain balance each year of uncommitted funds, so we maintain a certain, sort of like a rainy day fund, if you will.
So in case there's a financial crisis or something, have that.
That's right, we have that, as well as as part of that is your stabilization funds, your free cash positions, all those are funneled into that area.
Yeah, that's where it gets confusing for people.
Free cash is free cash is actually a subcomponent
Of that number.
Unreserved.
Is it used differently? Why do we segregate it out because it's used differently? Is it used the same as the
No,
total? We just
what happens
fund it
is
down?
you put $1 million in, and then the state comes back and says, okay, how much do you still have outstanding? Which is, this is almost like a double hit. But they say, how much do you still got outstanding in real estate and personal property? and then they take that off and say, you still can't use this amount of money. So like, let's say you had $1 million in there, and there was still a $500,000 out there for
Uncollected.
personal property and real estate that hasn't been collected, then they'll set a free cash, meaning you can use $500,000 of that $1 million.
The other half is reserved.
It's a
The other
reserve.
half is reserved until you take that money in.
Exactly.
It's almost like a reserve for bad debt, which begs the question, if we've already done it under the reserve for, the assessors with the,
Assessors with
yeah,
with the overlay surplus.
the overlay. It's almost like a double hit, but, again, it's,
Yeah.
but that's the way it works, so it's, you almost got two governors on this one.
So going to the free cash position is a subcomponent of the reserve fund, is of the unreserved fund balance is that's the amount of money at the end of the year, as George said, what the state will actually certify what your free cash position is. So it's all the money that we haven't spent on anything, and it's there for appropriation, but it has to be appropriated through town meeting. Okay? The stabilization fund is really your rainy day fund. I mean, that's any major, anything that could happen unforeseen, requires a 2/3 a vote for town meeting to put the money in. It takes 2/3 vote to take the money out. Everybody clear on that? Okay. As far as the capital stabilization fund, that's a fund that we actually created a couple of years ago. And we set it for the purpose of just taking care of major capital expenditures that we thought were coming down the road. Okay, i.e. Borough School. We set that money aside. We had a year, a couple of years ago, probably in 2018, 17, 18, as I recall, where we actually, we took in we had a really good, successful year with Gillette Stadium, and we took in a significant amount of extra money, and we took $1 million of that and we set it right aside for that purpose, so that we could actually help reduce the long-term liability for that. The overlay reserve fund is the amount that we set aside each year before we even start the budget process, because we know we have folks that may apply for abatements, for folks that may apply for assistance through like a veterans assistance or an elderly assistance program, that we have several of those. That's where that money comes from. Okay?
But other than in reevaluation years, the potential use for that is very, very small.
Right.
In a revaluation year, there could be a lot more people arguing the value that has been placed on their home, and therefore you have a higher liability of having to spend some of that out.
Correct. All right. So the reserve fund, no less than 50,000, no greater than the 1%. That's for use throughout the fiscal year. So in other words, and actually the advisory committee is the one that actually approves the use of that money. It's set pretty on a limited basis. It used to be a much bigger number, and I think Jack remember that he was on the committee a number of years ago, where the number was actually a little bit higher.
No,
Yes.
when I was on it, it was 50,000.
Okay.
But in subsequent years, it gradually went up to 150.
Okay.
So now it's back down to 75.
Right. And the reason why that is because the state legislature has, and the state has allowed us to actually allow the town manager to have what is known as end-of-year transfers, which I can then bring forward to the Board of Selectmen and then ultimately to the advisory committee for final approval. Okay? So the unfunded liabilities, the pension speaks for itself. We pay into Norfolk County pension system. So that number that we get from them is not set by us, it's set by them, but it is evaluated on a regular basis. And they right now, there's been an aggressive move towards getting it back to, getting it paid for by 2029. Now, we know that the stock market didn't do so well the past 2 days, but that's sort of expected that happens in that business, and that's why they have actuaries that do these calculations. The unfunded liability for OPEB is the other post-employment benefit liability. So people that retire from the town, there's a certain amount of liability for health benefits, and for years, cities and towns would never put that on the books. But the federal government says now you have to. You have to put it on your books as a liability. And so what we've done is we've actually, not only are we paying it down, by the way, we're probably one of half a dozen communities in the state that's doing that. Not many have actually made that claim. And we're actually setting aside $1.1 million a year to pay it down, which is that you've got that along with the other $1.1 million above. So right out of the gate, we're reducing how much money we can actually spend into the budget itself.
I think one of the important things, this adherence to fiscal policies. The policies, as Bill had said, we're putting into place in 2016. They were signed off by every major board in the town. There are copies you can get if you'd like to read through it. It's very interesting, but that is what got us our AAA rating. It was setting the stage for exactly what level of reserves, what level of cash will the town accept as its values, and put it in a good financial stance. And again, it was at the time, it was a little aggressive because obviously we weren't meeting a lot of the values that were in that financial policy. So we had to actually put more money away to do it. So from the rating bureau's point of view, they're looking to see, A, do you have a policy? Again, not every town, even touching us, has a policy that we have. And B, are you adhering to it? Are you actually putting that money away and saying we're not going to touch it and we're not going to go through the use of it? The other two important things on the, if you understand the pension and the OPEB, on the OPEB side, that money, as Bill had said originally, is still under our control. So that $10 million is still sitting in town coffers, not sent to a third party. However, when you build any pot of money up with any standard investment, you're going to have growth just based on interest through the process, which means once you get that fully funded, it actually will start building revenue above and beyond what its liabilities are and effectively create a revenue stream to reduce your future requirements for that fund, for future needs. On the pension side, with Norfolk requiring us to basically pay up everything in a shorter period of time, they will end up in the same situation. They will now have a fully funded pension liability setup that makes money, that reduces the town's future liabilities as well, because again, instead of us always just trying to pay the required amount for people that are out on retirement, now there's a pot of money that's being invested that exists out there. So those are two very large things that have major impacts down the road. And if you just take the simple math, you're looking at nearly $5 million in taxpayer money that will no longer be part of the town's budget out in 2035 or 2032, depending on how it runs out. Those were two also very large changes in the last 10 years in our budget process. We weren't doing that 10 years ago. So if you're looking at our total budget numbers are up by $5 million because we didn't even put that money away 10 years ago. So those are kind of major factors when you're looking at those two accounts.
To Bill's point, if you look at the OPEB piece right in the back, the second to the last page of the handout, it turns, that negative is not really a negative, that's a positive. It's a negative outflow, meaning it's money coming
back to the town.
Coming back to us.
So we actually generate about $2 million, I think, in the
Yes,
first
on
year,
that,
once
yeah.
we pay it off. Yes.
So, Dennis, so I'm new to the advisory council, I come from healthcare, but I've sat in front of very pleasant people from Standard & Poor's many times over the years. And what you've done with your OPEB liabilities, your pension liabilities, is extremely impressive. And the evidence of your accomplishments and the adherence to the financial policies is getting that AAA rating from Standard & Poor's.
Right.
That is extremely difficult to achieve, so I just want to call that out. You're going to retain that with the borough school?
Yeah, we believe that's the case. We'll know Friday when the report comes out, but the good news is that the meeting went very well. They indicated to us that the report will be back a lot quicker than we thought, which is a good sign, so I fully expect that we will retain it.
And to your knowledge, the whole reason for the AAA rating or the advantage to the town is obviously what we'll get on interest rates. So we're getting the lowest level of interest rates on our borrowing of any community because of being AAA rated. I believe when we originally projected the borough project back in 2019, we were looking at a 3.5% interest rate. Right now, we're seeing rates below 2% for AAA. So we actually are going to have a savings on that level, which again, presumably we will use just to pay it down in a faster method. But I think that keeping the Standard & Poor's rating is critical to us. So bolstering us as we go forward, again, within our budget, putting more of this money away on an annual basis is important because, even with an increase in an operating budget, some of these are tied to the level of your operating budget percentage-wise.
So there's been conversation in advisory committees in the last year or so about the fully funding. It says 2035, possibly earlier.
Yeah.
If we're being fully candid, could say possibly earlier or possibly later, because it's an actuarial calculation. We don't know what the markets are gonna do. But, so that's a point of contention, or that it was potentially. But I think pretty much everyone in this room agrees that funding OPEB is the right thing to do in the right direction and the right thing to do for the town. So I tend to focus on that piece of it, that we're all sort of holding hands for the most part on the funding part of it.
Right.
And we get there when we get there, and hopefully it's before 2035.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I mean, based upon all our projections, all actuarial calculations, that's where it stands, but, you know, and quite honestly, if the actuarial calculation comes back and says, you know, because we took a hit this year, maybe because the market goes down a little bit, then it stays down for a little while, maybe we have to put a little bit more money towards that next year because to help stay on track with that calculation. So that's another consideration. So I think our goal is to try and get there as fast as we can, because it frees up financial capabilities of the town to do things in the future.
We're required to have that every 2 years, and the page you're looking at is fresh off the latest one that we've only gotten within the last
2035?
Yeah. So, Tom?
With the interview for the rating with Standard & Poor's, is that a wholly generic representation of Foxborough, or is there some contextual concept with regards to surrounding communities, your state, what other people are doing of our size and stature?
They compare us to on national standards, national standards. All right, and so we look at, and they look at what we do financially and how and the size of our organization, size of our budget, size of our population, and how we are and how we compare. And that's what they look at on the national level.
But they're not relative, right? They're standards.
Yes, exactly.
Right, they're not relative because we're in a certain type of area.
Right.
Affluence. I think it's, you have to meet XXX everyone.
I mean, what they're looking at is, you know, the fact that we do have policies, the fact that we do pay down our long-term liabilities, the fact that we're paying our long-term liability, even on the school, in 20 years versus 30 years. We could actually do it 30 years. Doesn't make sense for us to do it that way. So we're going to do it 20 years because we think we can pay it off faster. And then on top of that, right now, it's interesting because, as Bill points out, those rates could come in under 2% this year, and we budgeted for 3.5%. So that's a savings that we can maybe look at. But there's another way we may want to look at that. Should we pay down the debt more aggressively for that same amount of money? That's another way to look at it.
You know, the last one, you mentioned it, Bill mentioned it a couple of, probably a month or two ago. I think it kind of went over the boards, but since we're talking, the last Standard & Poor's came out and they made the statement in there that Foxborough was in a better position to pay off its bills than the United States government.
I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, which isn't saying
We can't
much,
print
but
money.
but they actually made that
Yeah,
statement.
it's,
Can't print our
I guess that's relative to a degree, right?
yeah.
Anyways. All right, ready to move on? Yep.
One more question on that page. On one hand, one could argue that this one page is that we are essentially strengthening our balance sheet.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yet, it's at the expense of our taxpayers looking at every year their property taxes going up. How do we find a better way to communicate that there is a relationship is the pay me now, pay me later scenario?
Right.
People who are not exposed to, let's call it, all this side, see their yearly property tax going up,
Right.
and it comes back to us, therefore the stress on us.
Right.
Yet, it's all about that amount of money between the pension and OPEB, it's roughly shy of 8% of the $80 million budget.
Right.
So how do we find a better way to communicate that it's all for what we just talked about?
That's a very good point. So I think the one way of looking at it, doesn't mean it's the only way to look at it. One way to look at it is that by taking the position that we're paying down our long-term liabilities, that means that we're going to be taking care of the kids of tomorrow. All right, so we're not kicking the can down the road. We're taking care of the future generations that are going to be living in this town and not have the same level of liability, long-term liability.
Bernie, I'd also...
Another thought to look at that too is that's why we're here today.
Right.
So the leaders of the community can get a good idea of what's going on And then when people ask us, we have the answers.
Thank you.
Bernie, I'd take it one step further, too. If we didn't have these policies in place and we didn't have these reserves structured the way we have, it would be costing the taxpayers more money for everything we did, because our borrowing costs would be up, our ratings would be down, and everything that happens in that way is directly on the taxpayers' back to resolve. So we're basically building a system that tries to mitigate increases to the taxpayers' side of things while taking care of the liabilities.
Can I just jump onto Bernie's point there? So like Dennis, I've spent a lot of time with S&P, and I like hearing this. I totally buy into the need to move the needle on them and the benefit it has long-term. But to your point, like, it's not enough that when people ask us questions, and they do, that we tell them. I wonder if there's a more systematic way to get this out there. Not everybody's on, the cable right now watching us. I personally, before I got in the advisory committee, I didn't get to see any of this stuff, and it wasn't really visible to me. So going back to Bernie's point, is there a more systematic way to?
So thank you for that comment. Maybe I just misunderstood, but getting the word out following tonight's meeting, the presentation that we're going to, that's why we wanted to have it televised. It's being taped. We're going to be able to, people will be able to see it again for themselves. On top of that, we're going to follow up at the end of this week, and we're going to ask people to watch it and then ask questions. So we can actually probe them a little bit to see what kind of concerns they have or what questions they might have, so we can maybe help educate them even further.
That's helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Sue?
How much is the unfunded liability for the pension? Where's that at now?
Yes, it's actually in the sheet, one of the backup sheets there. It's a 20.
It's not the OPEB, you want the pension liability, right?
Right, yeah.
What it's showing, though, is it's the whole county, not us. So it should, like, right now, it's like 570 million for the county.
For the county
Okay?
They don't break it down specifically for us, but they're on the same schedule as we are, so they're all paying into that same liability.
Do you know what the town number is?
I don't think they have it broken down that way, Sue. I apologize, but I don't think I can find out. We'll try and find that out. But I don't know if they break it down because it's done across the board. So, but we'll see. We'll find out.
It's got to be roughly around 36 million.
Roughly.
If you're paying in that $4.4 million level.
Yeah.
Is there anything written into that liability that as long as we take care of our business, that we won't, once we're done catching up, that we won't be hit upon to subsidize the other communities that haven't done their job?
Well, it's interesting you asked it because I actually have. We're trying to set up a meeting with the Norfolk County Treasurer and the pension director for the meeting with the town managers from all of Norfolk County. We're supposed to do that within the next month or two. So we're going to ask those kind of questions. So the answer, I think the answer is we don't get to do that. It's to us.
I understand it's a Commonwealth, but at the same time, it's
no. This is Norfolk County.
This is Norfolk County. And the difference with Norfolk County is everybody's paying in at the same levels right now.
Right.
So it's not like Foxborough, unlike OPEB.
We're not being treated differently.
It's not like Foxborough's paying in a higher percentage because we can, and the next town, Norfolk, is paying less. We're all paying at whatever our liability levels are. So when they finally get it fully funded, the whole group is fully funded.
Oh, I thought we were trying to catch up on what we had fallen behind on.
But every other community too is in the exact.
No, we're not behind. We're in the same position as everybody else is.
Oh, this is maintaining our.
Right.
Okay.
The whole county is behind.
Right.
All the counties are behind.
But not individually.
So then they have, like, they're imposing a additional cost to each individual town according to our draw upon that, or is it level across all the towns?
It's across all towns. So it's
It doesn't matter on your population or anything?
It's the actuarial, and it's based upon, your pension is paid based upon the amount of people that are collecting on it, right? But it's also based upon the number of people that paid into it. I think there's a misnomer out there and I think this is an important point, that the town just pays for that. Well, every employee pays about 11% of their pay goes into that system. So it's not free.
And actually, our percentage will only be about 3% as a community.
Right.
So once we get to the point where we're fully funded, the town's annual budget will be carrying at about a 3% of payroll payment on an annual basis. And all of the previous people who have retired or are about to retire, theirs is already fully funded. So can something happen? Yes. We may not have the investment growth in that overall fund, which means everybody in Norfolk County would have a continued liability or an increased liability to it. It could go the opposite way, where they make more money than what they were projecting because they have to do it on a conservative basis, and we could actually be in a situation where we have less to pay. But our standard would only be about 3% of our payroll.
So I've got a presentation I want to get through first, so I'll take one more question and then we'll go to, yeah, yes, sir. Yeah, okay.
So let's say town of Norfolk has fewer town employees, and are they paying the same 4.4 million?
No.
Or they're paying the same percentage?
It's their percentage on their payroll.
Yes,
I just want to.
exactly. Okay. Exactly. So you want to take this last one? You're good? Okay. All right, very good. All right, let's move on. All right, so this is a very interesting chart because this shows the FY19 five-year forecast, which shows that in FY19, the budget forecast was for municipal forecast was $17,728,927. We actually came in at that same number, okay? But in FY20, the municipal forecast was for $18,261,422. The number actually came in at $18,142,287, or $119,000 less than what we projected. In FY21, we're projected to come in at $213,000 less than what we looked at. Now, going to the school forecast, the school was actually up $136,000 in $137,000 in FY20. But of that 137, 80,000 of that, almost 81,000 of that was actually increased grants and sped funding, which actually offset that. So the net increase to the town over and above that was 56,153. As far as in FY21, same thing holds true. They're up about 446, and actually the offset is almost $300,000. The net impact to the general fund is 148,281 over and above what the FY21 projection was supposed to be. However, if you net the two numbers together, we're actually still coming in less than what we projected. Okay, does everybody see that? 213 from 956 on the town side. The school is up by 148. You subtract the two, you end up with a net gain, as what we actually projected. So we're actually better than what we originally estimated 3 years ago. Right?
And I just want the reason that original five-year forecast was put together was because we were looking at the borough project, and we were looking at ways of how we were going to finance this, and whether or not we had to go to a debt exclusion, and whether or not we could get comfortable as a community that within the tax levy limit, we could make it. So obviously, we had to put a lot of work together to obviously project out the schools, project out the town side, and say, what level could we, make this thing work and still make that debt payment fit within it. One of the things that's interesting about this, you're going to see as we go through this, is that with that debt payment and everything, we are exactly where we said we would be in this year in our total number. We're at like 5.8%. We said we'd be at 5.5, 5.6% because we were including that debt in it. So we knew that this was the bump year with the inclusion of debt, and it was programmed out. So again, the town bought into that at the time. That's why we accepted doing the borough project as we did. We had two options at the time: not do the borough project or do the borough project under a debt exclusion. But we proved that it could be done this way within the operating budget. But it was going to come at a cost of FY21 being at around 5.5% as a total budget process. And that's what was, again, presented back in FY19. It hasn't changed, and the numbers basically are still holding fast to that.
Right, and what's even more interesting is the fact that the impact on the tax rate will not be as significant as it appears, because what we're using is available funds to offset that increased amount to help pay off the debt number. Okay, everybody understand that? Because we're not impacting the general fund tax rate by doing that. We're using available funds that we put away to help offset that.
Bill, the combination of operating and school, the increase of the combined is 3.5.
We actually left it about 3.2.
3.2.
Yeah, 3.2. If you on the operating side, if you look at the overall budget, it's about 4.75.
Right. Okay. So the 382 and the 274, the weighted average is 3.2.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right.
328.
328. When you add those two together, right? So this just sort of lays out the town operating budget. of, what it's projected to be. Again, we may be looking at further reductions in that, because there's things that we know could be trimmed at this point, because as the numbers become more clear, we might be able to actually further reduce that number. On the school operating side, that number's at 3.82%. The fixed cost is the number that's driving this budget. That's where the 8.42% comes in. But if the main budget driver is the new $15.34 million borough school debt being paid for within existing funds, principal is $540, the interest is $5,369. Pay close attention to this. That number might come down. The number might come down based upon where we come in with the bids on the school.
If it keeps going the way it is, they're gonna be paying us to take the money.
I think the reality there is, though, we're probably going to structure that loan a little differently and pay higher principal to drop the interest faster if it comes down. And I think would be the smarter tack for the town, is to try to eliminate that debt on a faster basis. If you look at most of our outstanding debt, almost all of our schedules go from on a fixed principal payment level, so we pay the same principal for out, not like you do on a mortgage, where it goes smaller to a higher. We've always paid from a fixed level and let that stay the same, which means your interest drops quickly in the process. And so if this all ties out to that ability, what we would suggest is probably that you're paying $700,000 in principal and using the balance for the interest and getting rid of the principal faster, again, dropping the schedule faster.
So we'll have to wait and see where the number comes in, but this is the amount of money that we budgeted, and it's within the budget right now. So we're not in any trouble here. This has all been forecasted out.
So would you agree that this is the page that was pretty much the impetus for this meeting? To make sure that this was understood?
Yeah.
So maybe we pause and whoever wants to talk to it or ask questions about it, or...
Absolutely. This is an important piece of this, yeah.
Now, is the bond rating, the bond interest for the borough offering locked in yet, or do you say it's going to be lower, right?
It's probably going to go into, in about 2 weeks, we should know what the number is. So it's a perfect time to go out to bond. Everybody say long-term bonds go out, 10-year bonds are selling at 1.3 this morning.
Right.
So that's, and that's probably the lowest in history, one of the lowest points in history. So
these numbers will come down.
These numbers should come down, but as Bill points out, that gives us an opportunity to restructure the debt in a better way to pay it down the principal faster.
Which, again, is advantageous from a rating point of view. Because it shows the ratings that you're not just taking the money and putting it into a potential operating budget and spending it, you're putting it to reduce debt faster.
Right.
So.
Anybody else? Yeah, Larry.
The town budget of 18,638.
Yep.
Where did you get that number from? If you look at the prior page, it's slightly off a little. If you go back one page to the one prior to this, the municipal budget line is 18,528.
18,528, and that number is 18,638. That one, the FY21, I don't think we've taken out, there's a couple other reductions in there I think we've actually factored in the previous one, whereas that's what, it's a little bit off. $100,000, I think, roughly. Yeah.
It's like halfway between the two. It's like halfway between the two.
Yeah, the stabilization. It could be the stabilization piece.
18.5.
Don't forget, we put $100,000 into stabilization, too. So that's really not operating per se, it's just so it's an offset. Okay. All right. All right, so let's take a look at the scenario without the debt, and you can see that the overall number, as we said, comes in at 3.28%, as we mentioned that earlier. All right, so the synopsis on the other impact was on the water and sewer enterprise. The main budget driver is the new $11 million water system improvements. That brings the debt impact is really on the water enterprise fund of almost 20%. But we'll see what happens once we take the debt out. It's 6.72%. You take the debt out. Now the reason why that number is high, even at 6.72, is because of the new requirements that are being imposed upon the cities and towns with respect to the water testing that we have to do now, which is something we didn't have last year. You want to speak to that a little bit more, Chris, just to address that?
So, as Bill said, on the operating side, we do have increased testing that's actually implemented already in town. We're looking at an extra $200,000 a year for PFAS testing. PFAS is a chemical, a forever chemical. It's been around for 40, 50 years, and it's used in a lot of things. There are 5,000 varieties of this chemical. We are currently testing for 6 of them in the water that DEP and EPA has put out there for us to test, to see what's out there in the world, see what's in the ground, see what we're pulling up out of the ground and putting into the water supply. So we are at a testing stage right now. We're hoping that our levels stay low enough where we don't have to start treating for this. If we do have to start treating for this, that'll change drastically. There are some towns locally that are planning 25% rate increases over the next 3 years, each year over the next 3 years to deal with this treatment. We are not there yet. We're hoping to stay below that level so that we don't have to go to that extent. Both this increase in the operating as well as the increase on the debt has been factored into a water rate study, which has been ongoing the last 5 or 6 years. We are projecting and holding at a 6% rate increase for the next fiscal year with that dollar amount included.
Okay. Right, questions? Brett, I'll go back to you, Tom. Brett?
Chris, is the PFAS associated rate increase, is that a one-time increase or to get our systems down, or will that project permanently into the future?
Once we start testing for it, sampling for it, unless we are below a certain level, there's a 10 part per trillion trigger level. If we are below that, then we don't have to test for it. But we do have to show that we've tested for it consistently. Right now, it's a quarterly test. It will be, based on our levels, we will be testing monthly for it. We go from testing at the entry point. So if we have 4 wells in a treatment plant, we have to test at after it's treated, after all 4 wells are combined and it goes into the system. Once that entry point is above 10 parts per trillion, we're not only testing going from quarterly to monthly, but now we're testing at the source as well. So we're going from 1 test a quarter to 5 a month at that one location. And these samples are $1,400 a piece. And this is what DEP and Mass DEP is pushing this at a lower level than EPA has federally. There are other states that have done that as well, but Massachusetts is pushing for a lower limit.
It used to be, what, 20 parts per trillion?
70 parts.
70 parts.
Federal EPA has it at 70 parts per trillion, and there are states that are holding that and just using what EPA says, and there are other local DEPs that are saying, we want to see it at 20 parts, we want to see it at, there are actually some that are lower than that, and there are advocacy groups out there that want to see it at 1 part per trillion, which there isn't equipment able to test at that level.
Extraordinary.
So until somebody develops it, that's, Massachusetts is going to be 20 is the treatment level, and 10 parts per trillion is the sample
acceptable level
requirement.
As a follow-up, in an aggressive scenario wherein you would have to consistently test and treat, what's the high end of rate increase based upon an aggressive scenario?
I mean, to treat, if we're treating per site, so if I had 4 wells on a site and I had to treat all 4 wells, we're probably a $10 million treatment plant. And the issue with PFAS chemicals are they're not treated the same way that we treat our water currently. So we have green sand filter plants. That's what the 3rd plant that we're building right now, that treats for iron and manganese. The PFAS is treated with an activated carbon. There are some people trying to figure out how else to treat it. That may not be as expensive. But there's one town locally that just did a temporary on 1 well, and it was $1 million treatment. and that's a temporary solution.
So we might get to the point where we want to give everybody a Brita filter for the house. I'm not, all kidding aside, I mean, it's an expensive proposition, no question about it.
Lastly, is, our companion communities that are in the current collaborative with us in the same boat, or are we riding this on our own?
No, this is,
No, we're all in it together.
Equally?
and there are communities in a lot worse shape than us in many ways. Actually, our water conditions are actually in a much better place than a lot of communities. So it's a Tom?
With what we've just discussed prior with the advantageousness of the marketplace and potentially lower interest rates, is there any bonding or funding that you've done for projects that you could refinance? Is there like a time before you can do that, or can you do it at any time, or is it not a possibility at all?
That's more of a George question in that respect.
What you can do is if there's leftover or whatever, you can pay it down, but there has been refinancing in the past, but I don't know what, I'll have to sit and look at what they actually did.
We've actually done it here. We've actually done it here.
I was wondering because it's an enterprise situation where you're charging fees anyway, so there's expected income there, whether or not it provides you the opportunity, a better capacity to be able to refinance and renegotiate your terms of the funding as opposed to maybe just being just a capital.
It's a fair point. I mean, we should look at it.
I mean, if you could chop from a 3.5% down to less than 2%, you're taking almost half of your interest rate right there and affording all the customers a lower rate increase quarterly.
You have to see how long the bonding actually still has on it, the ones that you want to refinance.
I didn't know if there's many opt-out parts, like after 5 years, 10 years, whatever, that you can possibly go back in and redo that, or if that's not possibly an option at all.
Bill was right that there already has been a refinancing.
We did that a couple of years ago, probably about 4 years ago, as I recall.
On the current capital projects we've already...
No, on some of the ones that existed at that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Steph?
Chris, the number increase for the sewer, at 2.53, is that the number that's the increase for the whole town? Is that the only increase from last year, 2.53?
Yeah, so that's the budget increase on the sewer enterprise.
So, quick question, maybe we can make a, I don't want to get into it here because it's not just about the whole town. In Summerfield, we have an increase of like 35 to 40% from last year for our sewage. So do you think we could get a couple of board members to come in and find out why we're incurring such a big increase when the town is 2.53?
Well, I mean, that's...
We have the budget, it's over 53%.
We can
I mean,
talk.
35%.
We can talk, but we send one bill
Okay.
for that property and that development, and that rate has only gone up the same rate as the rest of the town has gone up.
Oh, okay, all right, yeah, no, I'll talk to you about it later. We had to incur a 35% increase to the residents in there, so I'm not really sure. I mean, that comes from our IFED board that covers the, so, yeah, I'll actually, I just wanted to make sure I was reading that right. So basically, across the board, it's 2.53 for the whole town. Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on. All right. So these are the proposed budget highlights that I wanted to call out. We actually had a staff change in our office that's going to reduce our salary line by $6,900. Finance, the principal accounting clerk position and assessing is going to be split into two part-time, non-benefited positions. So we're getting a 2-for-1 deal, but less cost in the long term for the town, long term as well as short term. Geographic information systems. The People GIS systems, GIS annual fees for inspections, selectmen's licenses, Board of Health, and consolidated into one budget. Don't be fooled by the GIS class name, but that's the name of the company. They actually do provide a GIS function as part of what they do, but it's primarily for licensing and inspections and all the types of administrative type functions that we do with our various town departments. If there's any questions about the People GIS system, which is brand new, and it's working very, very well so far, you can talk to Aaron, and he'll give you some highlights on that. Okay.
The finance position, that's net zero.
That's actually net zero. It's actually less than net zero because we're actually cutting out the benefit costs.
Less than zero.
So The planning, the grant the request to increase the architect and engineer fees back to $35,000 to cover grant matches and study needs. That was something that I put in, recommended. We did recommend the new firefighter paramedic position to be fully funded by revenue from increased ambulance receipts. The fire chief is here for that, and this is a really good news story, because this actually could net result in actually a plus amount of money for the town, based on the fact that we can actually increase our service level. We would then be able to go to a third rescue during the day, which means that during the past year, we've missed over 120 rescue opportunities that were picked up by other towns because our rescue was busy. 2 rescues were busy during the time. So this will allow us to pick up some additional revenue by doing that, which will go into the ambulance fund and then obviously help offset that cost. SEMRIC, the regional dispatch, has been reduced in anticipation of state funding. We do anticipate that to actually happen. We just made that announcement the other night that we're looking at that as if the SEMRIC board met last week, that we are going to get some additional funding to offset our fees for the year. And so that should be able to reduce that number down. I might be able to look at either possible further reductions in that line as well. Water and sewer, new principal account clerk funded by the water and sewer rates. The position is needed to help monitor and assist with new state water quality requirements. As Chris just pointed out, we've got new requirements now that have to be monitored. That have to be, and also there is only one person who's in charge of billing for the water department. And if we look at things in our departments for critical points of failure, if something happens to that person, which we hope never does, we've got a big problem in our hands. So we're trying to provide a level of backup for that, and I think that's why I was able to support that in that position. New water system improvements, debt principal estimated at $390,000 and $385 principal. We talked about that earlier. The Board of Health, new part-time health inspector, approximately $16,000, will be raised through fees that haven't been looked at in several years. So we'll be helping to offset some of that cost. Again, a part-time position to help with the inspections. We've been running into a situation where we have more restaurants in town, we have more places that need to be inspected. We need more people to do it. Otherwise, that's simply a public safety matter. So.
Yeah, what's the estimate on? Sorry, I'm going back to. Estimate on the water department, water and sewer?
The position, it's $48,000, if I'm not mistaken.
Is that including?
Doesn't include benefits. Benefits would be probably another about 30%.
Okay, that's the dollar figure thing.
Yep. Right. Okay. Council on Aging, Human Services. They're a victim of their own success. Their programs are working exceptionally well. They've had a huge increase in popularity, and they just need more people to run the programs. And so it seems to make good sense to me. Our population is aging. It's about 25% of the population is 60 or greater now. So we're looking at that as a nice add-on for that program. It seems to be working really well. Library, new part-time young adult librarian. Reason was this was funded was because we have a room, but we don't have a person that runs it.
Yeah, that's right.
So that's a legitimate concern, and we're wasting facilities by not having a person run them.
Do you have a dollar figure on that?
That was about $30,000, so I'm not mistaken. Without no benefits, so there's no benefits. So yeah, about $30,000 net. The debt service principal, the New Borough School, we talked about that, and the debt service interest. Group insurance increase estimated at 3%. We will adjust the rate if the changes prior to the town meeting. The preliminary information is that number is coming down. Don't want to say it until they actually give it to me in writing, but they called me the other day and said the number was coming down. So that's good news. Risk management workers' compensation budget moved the budget to a different department.
Hey, Bill,
Put it all into risk
I don't see
management.
the DPW mechanic. Is that accidentally not on there? Has it fallen off? Should it be?
That should have been on there. I apologize. That should have been on there. Yeah, there was a DPW mechanic, which we added because we have 3 mechanics, Chris, that take care of the entire town's fleet, including all the buses. And quite honestly, if you look at how many vehicles are managed and repaired on an average, the number is extraordinarily high.
Yeah, we have over 178 registered vehicles. We have 178 registered vehicles for the town, with the exception of apparatus for the fire department. The DPW maintains everything in town, so that includes the school buses, police vehicles, DPW, senior center, van and car, the inspections vehicles, and a couple others, animal control. So we have had 3 mechanics. I will say Dave Lally has been on staff for 47 years, and we had 3 mechanics then. A lot less vehicles back then. So we.
And a lot less sophisticated too, by the way.
They are, yeah. They've changed.
A lot more
they've
sophisticated
drastically
nowadays.
Where you used to be able to work on things, and now you need specialty computers and technology to actually look at stuff and diagnose, which we do in-house for the most part. So this has been on the list for a few years now. I think Roger, as he was here, has probably been asking for 4 or 5 years for this.
I think we got to a point where we thought we could make it work, so.
4 or 5 years for both the water and sewer and the mechanic too, right?
Exactly.
Both of those?
Yeah,
Okay.
both of them. All right, moving on, you want to talk to us about the school?
Yeah, so the school's budget, obviously the largest portion of our budget is payroll, just over 450 employees in total. So our contractual increases, 8 contract unions were $612,000. We are actually looking at a reduction of 2.4 FTEs. If you've seen our big presentation, you'll know that there's a lot of movement with adds and drops, but basically the net effect is we're reducing in total by 2.4, which saves us $263,000. Our biggest expenditure that has increased over the last couple of years in a inordinate way, and for next year, our out-of-district placements for special ed are $863,000 more than they are this year. And our out-of-district transportation for those same kids is going to be up by $385,000. The only negative or positive to those increases is the state gives us a little bit more money. The $217,000 basically is additional what they call circuit breaker funds from the state to help cities and towns take care of those increases in special ed tuitions. So it's an area that obviously we have limited control on. Many kids that are coming to the town from other districts already have IEPs in place, and we have to honor those IEPs and fulfill those requirements. So as you can see, our biggest amount here of the $1.3 million is in just 2 lines, which aren't our payroll lines.
So this, I don't expect anybody to even actually see this, but the FY, this is the actually pension liability, and for all communities, and if you can see that for Foxborough's portion of this amount for FY20, its cost was $4.8 million. There was actually the FY30 estimated cost would be $567,000. So think about that's if we once it gets paid off, which was it will be FY30, approximately 10 years from now, we're going to save about $4.3 million. That's a significant savings. So you can see that's the schedule and what's left, and so it actually comes down. And this is what we're going to be amortizing and reducing. Right. And then on an FY20 cost of $1.64 million for the OPEB, the FY36 budget cost would be 0. And as was correctly pointed out, we'll actually be generating money for that account at that point. So we could actually, that could be a moneymaker in some ways. What we could use to offset all the costs in other parts of the budget.
Bill, is that fair to say budget costs are like, we still are going to put money in there for ongoing, right? We're still going to fund that.
Well,
It's going to create its own interest.
It's going to create its own interest, so it'll be an offset. You
You're
won't
always
have to pay for it anymore.
the actuarial things to see where you stand as compared to retired and current employees. But the rationale here is if we get it fully funded, we should be very close to covering
We're
current
paying
costs.
current obligations with the interest?
Yes.
Yes. So what happens there, so it's a fair question. So you can see in actually in 2036, we generate $2,454,000, almost $55 million. $455 million, and that will be used to offset that cost going forward, right? So
If you think about it, it's almost $65 million that's being invested in that project.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at the tax rate comparison, FY10 through FY20, and you've got your handouts that will reflect this. I thought it was quite interesting that we took a look at Foxborough's tax rate in comparison to the communities around us, and we used, the 7 communities that touch us? So we looked at that, and you can see in virtually every single case, Foxborough's tax rate on average was lower. So for instance, in 20, it's $1.33 lower. In FY19, it was $1.21 lower. It goes down all the way down from in FY 2010, it was $1.65 lower. So it's a pretty good range, but every single year of all the communities around us, our rates were actually lower. So I think that's important because, a lot of times we hear things, but we don't know the actual results of that. This is a pretty good comparison.
That's skewed towards Sharon. Obviously, Sharon is much higher, so as long as Sharon's way above Foxborough, will always be.
Actually, it's North Attleboro and Plainville are the only two that comparably look lower than ours, but their property values are lower than ours as well.
Yeah.
So the towns that are surrounding us, Mansfield and Sharon and Walpole and all those, where property values, well, not Sharon, Walpole, Mansfield are very comparable. Their rates are considerably higher than ours. Sharon is the same house in Sharon is twice the price and twice the tax.
$11 million tax.
Yeah, so we'll always be below the average of all the towns because of Sharon, unless something
No, you
happens.
take Sharon off, we're still gonna be
You
low.
take Sharon off, and it will still be low.
Nobody actually looks at the residential tax rate. They look at the tax bill. And
The assessment.
But that's there too, Jackie.
Well, yeah, but let me finish.
Okay.
Down the street,
Yep.
there is an overflow crowd with the planning board's sponsored meeting on housing, which has been a series of these. And the people are going to those meetings because they're concerned that as long-term residents, they can't afford to remain here, nor can their kids afford to buy here.
Right.
And if you look at that and you say, well, how can that be? And you say, and you look at the total tax bill from the Department of Revenue, which is where you're getting this, and you say the tax bill has been going up at twice the rate of inflation. Inflation in recent years has been about 2%.
Right.
And our tax bills that we get in the mail for the average single-family house has been going up at 4%.
And
And that's where people are having a problem. Not for any one year, but the accumulation of that.
So if you take a look at the next column with the average tax bill, you can see that that Foxborough is actually we've been averaging around 3%, 3 or 4%, and actually you see that we have the comparison in there. So how does that compare to the average? We actually did that in comparison to the average.
Bill, for the last 5 years, we've gone up 20%.
Understood.
Which is twice the inflation during that time.
But Jack, do you understand how that's built, though?
Yeah.
And here's the difference.
Right.
If we went up more than 2.5%,
Right.
it's only because people added to the value of their home. You can't go up. Legally, you cannot go up more than 2.5% unless you do a debt exclusion or an override. So the only reason our tax rates can go up the way they are is either people, built a bigger home, added onto a home, did major improvements to a home. That's the only way that can happen.
That's actually not true, because if you look at the general operating budget, it has gone up more than inflation.
That's not how the tax rate works.
And that general operating budget is generally paid for by the taxpayer.
Not more than 2.5%.
Not more than 2.5%. by law.
That's the reality of it.
So what happens is the total valuation of the town at any point in time is what the 2.5% is based on. So if your house, my house, and George's house is worth $100,000, we have $300,000, that can only go up by 2%. The only difference is I added a garage on, which added $50,000 to my house. So my tax bill will go up more than 2.5% because I have a new $50,000 valuation.
I haven't had anything, and my tax bill every year goes up more than 2.5%, as do hundreds or probably
So
several
what that
thousand
means
other
is,
people in the
that
town.
means that your house got assessed at a better rate than maybe the person down on the next street over, which got a lower rate. For whatever reason, by evaluation, when they do the reevaluation process, your house was in a better neighborhood, a better whatever, and the house down the street wasn't, so those switch that way. But the 2.5%, you can't use a single thing, a single house. It is locked by the whole town's valuation.
The truth is, it's not my house, it's many houses. That's why the senior center has more people in that meeting than they can handle. And when that similar meeting was held here a month ago, the same thing happened. There's a lot of people seeing that tax bill increase who didn't add a garage, who didn't expand the house. And that's because our average tax rate is going up a lot more than the 2.5%.
No.
About 4%.
Well, it's because the property value is
The
going
property value.
I can't spend my property value at Shaw's.
But neither can anyone else, Jack. That's the point, is that the reality is that everybody's value goes up at the same time. So it's the same thing, I'm facing the same thing in my own town of Seacon. The budget, it's not a function of budget spending, it's a function of value. The values keep going up. And so this is a problem, I mentioned this yesterday at the meeting you were at, and I said this at the meeting, I said, at the DPH meeting, I said this is a big problem for the entire state and for the entire region, is the fact that values keep going up because there isn't enough housing on the market.
Value doesn't change the fact that the general operating budget has been going up at 5%.
But you take a look at what your values are, and that's what's driving the number. That's what's driving your tax bill. It's not just the budget expenditures. You can see we can just see what my budget is for this year for the town. It's up 2.74% on without doing the debt, of course. But that was the debt that we all approved at town meeting.
I don't care what that value says on the tax bill. The only thing I care about is what's the amount of money I have to pay.
I understand.
The rest of it is numbers that accountants use.
And I get it. So the problem is that that's not something we can resolve. The good news about that is that the values are staying high in this area because we're providing good services. And people want to come and live in Foxborough. There's no housing available in this town. It's like less than 1%. It's a big problem. So that means people want to come here to live here. All right, so that means that we're not doing something bad. People wouldn't want to come here. The reality is that there's only so many houses on the market, and that's what's driving the values up. It's not on the expenditure side of the equation. I think all of the emphasis has been put on that, and that's an unfair comparison.
But the expenditures are going up at 5% a year.
Not in every case.
Well, 4.75% according to the
Well, okay, so that for this year, because we have the debt. If you take the debt out, it's down to 3.2.
If you look at the last 6 annual reports, the general operating budget has gone up an average of 5% a year.
Not according to what I got in front of me.
I will pull out the form and.
So I'd like to see your comparisons, Jack, because how you doing? Because you might be looking at the water and sewer number figured into that.
Unrelated.
Okay, I agree. So I'd like to see how you got to that number.
Is it fair to say if I didn't build a garage and my tax bill went up 4%, somebody else's necessarily went up by less than 2.5%?
Possible.
It has to be,
No, it
I
has
think,
to be.
necessarily.
That's the way the law works. It has to be.
Right.
And Bill, there is one very important thing, and probably everybody in here knows it, but for the folks at home, we said this when we had the hearing on the tax rate. This is not, the way that the things are calculated here in Foxborough is not inherent to Foxborough. This is statewide. This is everywhere. We have to follow the same exact way of measuring and calculating. Every assessing office does the same exact calculation. So it's not just something that we're doing, it's the whole
And the reason our total tax revenue can go up by more than 2.5% is because of new growth. Okay, so, in other words, you're taking your evaluation from the prior year, you're adding 2.5%, that's what you can tax out. But then you had $2 million in new development that happened that gets taxed.
And
that's why
plus,
tax.
property taxes are only a portion of our total revenue stream, so.
Correct.
Yes.
Yes.
Big portion. but-
Probably about 50.
It's probably the biggest portion.
Of course, yeah, but not all of it.
So I don't know if you took a look at this sheet that we attached, where you looked at the communities that, the single-family tax bill for 2018, 2019, and 2020. And you can see, that's on the last page, you can see that our tax bill average has not changed in the past 2 years. We were ranked 83rd in the state. Well, now we're still ranked 83rd in the state. Now, the ranking for 2020 still hasn't come out yet, but that's where we are. We haven't moved, which means that we're maintaining pace with everything around us. We're not going down, we're not going up. We're staying right where we were, where we started. I think that's important. I mean, you got to keep it in perspective that if you look at the value, Jack, and I think this probably gets to your point. The average values in the towns around us, Sharon, Norfolk, Walpole, Mansfield, Foxborough, Rentham, Plainville, North Attleboro. The average value is $2.2 billion. Foxborough's value is less than $2.1 billion. But if you take a look at what that value was, and I think I saw something earlier, I think the value was, it's right here, is the value in 2010 was $1.7 billion. We picked up almost $500 million in value. That's a significant change in value.
Actually, perhaps what could help the audience is in that document that you passed on, and if you look at the page before last, that reads average residential tax history.
Yes.
It goes back to what I believe you were trying to say. If you look at, for example, 2017, the average value of a home, I don't know if you would have it here, was shy of $413,000.
Right.
Now, the average tax bill was $6,200.
Right.
The tax rate was $15.
Right.
In 2020, the tax rate goes down to $1,457, but the average value goes up $473K.
Yeah.
Therefore, the total tax bill goes
up.
Is that page perhaps explain that relationship between average value? Again,
that's right.
Maybe no one looks at the tax rate, but this page is perhaps important to see the relationship between the average value and the tax rate. Sometimes the tax rate goes down. Unfortunately, the average value as a whole goes up. That's that relationship.
What's even more interesting, Bernard, I appreciate the point, is that if you take a look at what our tax rate was in 2018, it was $1,457. In 2020, it's still $1,457. So the rate has not been affected. It's the value that's gone up. So I feel and I understand your concern, because I'm affected by it too. In the community I live in, same exact thing. It's going up every year. The bill's going up every year, primarily because the values continue to climb. Across the board. Across the board.
If the values were even just held neutral, you're still going to have an increase in the cost of operating. Expenditures for operating, and also for your liabilities that are fixed.
Exactly.
They're going to still be where they are. So.
And we're trying to. And the good news about that, Tom, is that we're doing everything we can to try and eliminate the liabilities.
Right. You should be seeing an increased tax bill that approximates inflation.
No.
The reason for that is, excuse me, I'm speaking. Okay. All right, you'll have a chance in a moment. But we are all paying, whatever town we're in, we are paying for the same services: police, fire, education, the functions that go on in town hall. So. And those costs go up, but those costs go up, they should be going up at approximately the rate of inflation. In fact, in most of the local towns, including Foxborough, they're going up at twice the rate of inflation. But the homeowner doesn't see increases in income that are much greater than the rate of inflation, and that's where the problem is.
Dave, do you want to say something?
Yeah, so appraised values do not increase by the rate of inflation, so you're using different metrics. The other thing is, you can't take advantage of homeowner appreciation. Yeah, you can't spend it, but you'll get it back at some point. Everybody here who owns a home is the beneficiary of rising home values and appreciation. So you're using inflation as a metric, but home values aren't valued by inflation. There's no tying.
Supply and demand.
I'm not suggesting there is. I'm suggesting that the value of the services that the town provides the homeowner should be going up at approximately the rate of inflation. And they, in fact, are going up at twice as much.
Well, I would suggest you though, Jack, that assumes that the operating expense itself goes up at that rate. But
That's right, yes.
But you're looking at the fact that our operating expense isn't far off from that. So it's the fact that we're also paying long-term debts and liabilities that we're paying down that are adding to that cost. No question about that. And what's not being said here, and I don't know why anybody doesn't want to talk about this, is that we did not do a debt exclusion for this project. That would have generated another $1.1 million of taxes that we would have had to charge everyone in this room.
Bill, no, I'm not questioning the Borough School project. But if you look at the last half dozen annual town reports, you will see that the debt was going up at less than, at about the rate of inflation.
Okay.
Whereas most of the other expenses, whether it be education, police, fire, and so forth, were going up at considerably higher rates.
I'd be happy to
Jack, I
look
think
at that.
the biggest value to that is if you think about it, health insurance for everybody has not had anything to do with the inflation rates. It's the biggest trigger in our process. You know, when you look at, the
pension costs,
I'll look at the school
10%.
budget this year alone.
Yeah.
2 lines that we have zero control on, from a perspective of cost, are driving our entire budget. And they are not within inflation rates. That's not, that itself, those 2 lines don't create the inflation.
All right, that is this year, but if you look at previous years,
there's other accounts
also
everywhere.
going up more than you would expect, while the population in the school was decreasing.
Tom?
Okay, I think there's another, not to be argumentative here, I think there's another aspect here to, while you may not put a garage or addition or improve your own property, the town is also investing in infrastructure that adds to the value of everybody's property, whether it's on that connected street, if you have sewer that's now going down your street, those investments that you don't really necessarily have control over, except for maybe going to town hall and a town meeting and voting on them, but those are being made on behalf of the town to the townspeople that enhances the value of your property without anything that you've actually done physically to your property. Mm-hmm. And by that case, that can be increase the value of your property better than 2.5% or better than the inflation rate that you're talking about. And that's something for the long term. Like I said, for sewer, improving the water pipes, whatever, doing the lighting, changing the lights over. I mean, all that kind of infrastructure investment is a collective investment that everybody supposedly will benefit from, especially if it's distributed evenly across town.
I absolutely agree. But I get Jack's concern because there's a whole segment of the population that's running into the situation where they're on a fixed income, but yet the amount of cost that they're paying just to live here is starting to outpace that. And as a result of that, they're very concerned about what it's going to mean for the long term. I share that concern. I do. We haven't figured out the mechanism for fixing it other than to try to provide cheaper housing for people and cheaper alternatives, which is something we're trying to address. But the problem is that because it's such a desirable place to live, the land costs alone are driving that number. If you've been to the meetings that we've been having on that, all the developers have said the same thing. It's all land cost. Stephanie, I'll come back to you.
And so, like, I feel for you, Jack, the same things like all of us. We all live in town. You know, well, not all of us, most of us live in town. So, and the taxes are what the taxes are, and it's great that our property values are going up, and I know that it's drives by having a good school system and good public safety. But I think what we could work better on is the things that we can control. And, you know, I know I've said this over and over at AdCom, I've said it at town meeting. The town population isn't growing, but every year we're adding positions. Now, honestly, I don't want to steal your quote, Leah, because I heard you say it and it's in my mind. A year that we know we have this debt coming on with the borough school, is that the year that we want to be adding 6 or 7 positions? I didn't hear the entire presentation for the ambulance, so, but, you know, the bits and pieces I did hear, I mean, so are we having trouble getting our residents to a hospital that we would invest in another ambulance to run something from Brigham and Women's in town? Like, if we need another ambulance because we cannot get our residents to a hospital, I'll raise my hand at town meeting all the time and support that. But to think of that as just another way to bring in revenue, you know, I think there's other things that where this budget continues to go up extremely high that can be controlled. I mean, I feel for the water department, you know, where if somebody's out sick, they can't generate bills. But you know what? Then we need to cross-train. Because my husband works in an office with 4 people, and when he's out sick, his work gets done because there are other people. So I just think for the residents listening at home, and we understand taxes go up. There's nothing we can do about that. The tax rate is what it is. It's great that our property values go up. But I think as boards, administration, residents going to town meeting, we have to see where there are some savings. You know, I mean, a budget comes forward and everybody just says, okay, this is the budget. We can't cut anything. You know, at home, you know, if all of a sudden something comes up, I have to have the brakes done on my car. Well, I'm going to save somewhere else to pay for my brakes. So I just think we could do a better job, everybody, about looking to where we can save and when we can make things work and that it's a comfortable work environment. And, you know, the taxes are the taxes. But I do think the disconnect that we're having, and I went to both of those housing meetings, and all the seniors there, and they hear the word affordable, but it's really not affordable because most of them don't qualify for any of that affordable housing because they own a home already. They want to sell it and downsize, but if you own a home, you're really not going to be able to downsize. Now, tonight, Paige said they're looking into some other things that can truly be affordable, that they're not in that is it 240B? 40B? 40B. So I just think we could do a better job of cutting where we can cut.
So
and there are things that you can't.
Let me just put that in perspective for you, right? These are things that the department heads that run the day-to-day operations have said, I need these things because our operations are running thin, which they are. I've given you a budget which reflects that analogy. At the end of the day, you don't want it, cut it. But it comes at a cost. That's my point. So you have to understand. I put forward a budget which I think is in the best interest of all the operating departments collectively, because they're trying to put their best foot forward in terms of providing the best service. But if you cut it, you understand you're going to get something less for doing that. And it means, and so,
where is this drive, though? I understand if the population grows a lot, I understand there are certain things that are just going to, departments that have to grow. But we don't see that growth there.
Stephanie, let me just finish my thought.
Yeah.
The reality is that it's not just driven by population, all right? The complexity of the work that we do now is far more advanced than it ever was before. Everybody demands something every single day. And when we're not able to provide it, we hear about it. You may not always hear about it, but we do. and we want to provide the best services we can. We get the fact that we can't provide the best services in the world, but we try to provide a really good service for the value that people pay for this town.
Yeah.
People want that. People really, truly want
Bill,
that.
I've lived in town for 22 years, my husband's been for a long time. Neither one of us, I think, have ever been like, oh my God, we live in a town where we don't get this, or we live in a town where we don't get that. And the one last point I want to make, and then I'll shut my trap, is that the salaries. Now, the disconnect there as well is, I don't care if you want to call it 2 and 2 or 4, but what drives the salaries in this town is not what the average person is making. The average person isn't making a 4%. So that's also a little bit of what's creating, and for the seniors, unfortunately, when, most of them retired now, when they were making their living, they weren't making salaries that people making today. So their pensions aren't what the people that are retiring now are. So it's just that it's nobody's fault that there's just these gaps, and the fact that seniors live older, it's, I just wish we could bring the gap a little closer. We can't close it, I'm sure we can't close it, but there's a number of things I think that we could work on, and some of that is the average taxpayer, the taxpayer sees the taxes go up. Now, we know we can't control that, but their salaries aren't going up to catch up to the salaries, and the salaries drive a lot of our budget. Those are the fixed costs. So there's just a lot of different parts that are making the homeowners, the residents, not be able to keep up with where the town is going.
Okay, so with respect to the salaries, I know this has been an issue you've had for a long time.
Yeah.
I repeatedly told you, not everybody's salary goes up by 4%. That's a fact, okay? The other thing that's important, we live in a job market that is so tight, it's really hard to get people to apply and to stay. We've seen changeover in our organization that I've never seen before. Why? Someone will get offered a $25,000 pay increase to go somewhere else. We just experienced it. So we're not paying all that much higher. We're trying to be competitive with the surrounding towns around us. That's important if you want to keep good people in these jobs.
Do you think we could get that information, Bill, so we could see it and pass it on to other committees, boards, residents?
We are very competitive in our wages. We're not overly competitive, we're competitive. That's all we expect to be. We don't shoot for the moon, we shoot to be competitive, and that's all we ask for. So, Leo had a question.
Way off topic now, totally new topic. But,
Maybe we need to do that.
I think it's great that we're all coming in and we're educating on the financial policies and all this, but the question I get most, and I have an email that I just happened to pull up that I got recently, where someone asks, what are we doing to save money? In the private sector, everyone, you just said, it's far more complex work. Are we using technology? So while I think it's great that we're educating everyone on our financial policies and we're sound, I think we can do a better job maybe at educating people what we are doing to save there. Because, what the public hears is more. So let's do a better job at budget time, highlighting maybe what we're doing. Some of you may have heard this example before, but I used to work in an office with, maybe 1,800 people in Norwood, and they took everyone's trash barrel away. We had to get up and walk, over there, and everyone in this room kind of had to go use that same trash barrel. My job still got done. I was able to do, what I needed to do. But the amount of money it saved emptying, 1,800 trash barrels a day, it was something that saves money. So if there's things that we are doing, let's educate everyone and highlight, how technology is, helping permitting or whatever it is. So I think
we don't disagree with you. I think one of the challenges we face collectively is that we don't tell a good enough story.
So that's exactly, we need to talk about what we're doing to save. Like this right here.
What's that?
This right here from the school department, where they wanted 3 positions, but they went through, here's the 6.9 positions we're eliminating. It's easier to justify and say, okay, well, they just reduced this. We need to tell that story with what we're doing rather than...
I think part of the heart, you're right 100%. I think part of the problem is we continue to do things each year, and you have to keep recreating that wheel, because the example, we put in the solar farm, saving us $500,000 a year, still doing it every year. Putting in LED lighting across the entire town, whether it's every single building we have, whether it's street lighting, savings. It continues every single year. So we are doing processes. Yeah, we're doing processes every year, but it's hard to, I think, kind of put that as the high point of what we're doing when the real issue is how are we spending the money.
Right. And I think it just needs to be a page of the story. You know what I mean? We don't focus enough. So when I get the question, besides SEMRIC or, others, it's hard to tell the story. So I think we need to tell it so we can tell the story, but then everyone else needs to hear it as well.
So to that point, just response to that? Since I've been here, it's been 6 years, I've kept a running tally of accomplishments that this organization has done collectively. It's up to 13 pages long now. And that includes LED lighting, solar fields, the reorganization of several departments, the changing of how we structured our debt, the paying for projects within the levy. Collaboratives.
And I think we should look at that. We should have like a 5-year strategic plan too for other things that are on the table, almost like your capital improvement, whatever. Here's these big cost savings that we have in mind. Because you can do less with more if you do shell out a little bit of money maybe for technology or whatever it is. But I think that's a piece of the story that I think we're kind of missing as a page in this.
But I just want to be clear, that's not just my accomplishment, that's the town's accomplishment. So the 13 pages long. Go ahead.
Just a quick question. So for your budget, for your proposed budget, what are a couple of things that you decided that were requests from departments that you couldn't put in? Because right now I feel like we're all thinking that basically whenever they request anything, you threw in the budget, okay, cool, let's move forward. So what are some things that you couldn't include?
Thank you for that question, because I actually cut out about $300,000 worth of requests. $320,000 of requests. So that included like full-time positions in the library, a full-time position, like we cut it to a half. A full-time position in Board of Health, cut it to a half. We took the position in your office and split it. There's adding another person, right? And so we saved on the benefit costs and actually made it 2 people instead of 1, but with less cost. Those are the kind of examples that came up. I can tell you that virtually everybody was requesting some help. I mean, I can tell you that we could actually use more help in HR. We could, because we're a big enough organization that we have a half person other than Mike running HR as an organization with a couple hundred employees.
The other area where you trimmed back was putting back on department heads, how you're going to fund this position.
How you gonna fund it,
So
right.
one of the full-time positions that was put on the department head, find a way to fund it, and 2 of the half-time positions were not only cutting out that 30% in the benefits by making it part-time, but how you're going to fund it, restructure the fees, look at the creative ways to fund it within the department.
So you're right. It's just not one side of the ledger. It's both sides of the ledger. So thank you for that question.
But each department should probably be challenged, not only, what did you do this year?
Right.
What did you do this year to help save money in your department? I mean, everyone is,
And we have those questions.
just like everyone does.
We do that questioning. That line of questioning does occur. In fact, it goes all the way down the line with all the departments, and we have that conversation. I asked these guys, okay, what are you going to do to make this happen? And Mike actually came up with a way to make it happen in his operation. He said, I want to add another fire. I said, not if you can't pay for it. He said,
Yeah, and
find a way to
some of
do
them are a little bit more anecdotal, I'll say. Some of the other positions are more.
it. So, but it's a fair point. Chris, you're going to say?
Can I just touch on the water and sewer, just on that one position? I don't get a lot of TV time. Not that I want it.
You want a mic, by the way? So you want to bring up the mic?
No, I think just for that position, like I said, it's been something we've been asking for a few years now. That department has had 3 admin again for the last 25 plus years. That workload has changed drastically.
Yes.
The department, under the direction of the Water and Sewer Commissioners, has local regulations, and we have local direction from that commission as to what we should be doing. We also rely on, or report to DEP. DEP tells us what we should be doing. We report to EPA, they tell us what we should be doing. So this isn't a position that we're asking for because we just want extra help. This is something where over the years, and in front of AdCom, Stephanie, we presented what has changed over the years. So we have shown that in 10 years, the amount of invoices that we process in that department has gone up 40%. We were processing in 2010, 1,500 invoices. We are now over 2,000. We were at 2,200 invoices in 2019. So that task has changed 40% on the daily workload. Yes, we have one person that does the utility billing for all of water and sewer customers. We have been trying to cross-train. The issue is, anytime somebody walks in the door, anytime the phone rings, that cross-training gets interrupted. So we're looking for somebody who can be dedicated to that customer service aspect so we can do cross-training. We have seen that when we had time, we were able to do collections. So instead of sending overdue water bills to lien, we were actually notifying residents, notifying property owners, you owe this balance, and we've gone to a process where instead of letting it go to lien, we shut them off. They get 30 days notice to pay, they get 7-day notice to pay, they get a 24-hour notice, and then we go out there with a wrench and we shut them off. And that has, we've shown, when we had time to do that, and that is an admin function, doing all that paperwork, reaching out to those customers, when we've had the time to do that, we dropped our debt to lien, or money to lien, from $120,000 down to $60,000. So we've cut that in half, and that's money revenue we're collecting within the same fiscal year that we budgeted for that money to be coming in. We have seen now in the last year and a half, because of the changes in DEP and EPA, we haven't had the time to do that, and we're back up over $100,000 in that revenue that we're not collecting. So there are things, and it's not just that one position, but as a department head and as, the chiefs sit next to me, we go line by line every year to see what can we cut. What didn't we use all of this year? What has changed in the last 3-4 years that we no longer require that funding for that purpose? And you can see in the line items that there are reductions in those line items, and there are consolidations in those line items. So if in the highway department budget, and I'm going to shift, highway department budget, we have equipment maintenance and we have material costs for vehicles. So we have 3 different divisions. We have equipment maintenance, we have highway, and we have tree and park. We chose this year to consolidate all of that under equipment maintenance just as a functional thing. So we looked at all 3 divisions, we looked at the budgets, and we said, equipment maintenance is approving it all, put it all in that pot of money, that's where it should be allocated. So we do look at our budget line by line every single year to see where we can save money and to right fit the budget. Just because we have bottom line within the water department budget or within the highway department budget doesn't mean that's where I want to see I don't want to see it just sit flat. I want to see the money be allocated where it's supposed to be allocated. I don't want to go negative in a line item if I don't have to. And if I do, I'm going to change that in the next fiscal year to make that budget fit.
So I'm going to try and cut it off there, only because my goal was not to get too much into the weeds, but I think it's important. I think the key point tonight was to educate and to also hear from you collectively, some of the frustrations as well as some of the accomplishments, and to see where we can go from here, because this is actually a good story. I think unfortunately it gets detoured a few times because certain things get twisted around a little bit, but the reality is that we've heard that the good story was told today to S&P out of New York. They agreed with it. I think most of you here will agree with that. We have a good story to tell. We're trying to everything to address Jack's problem, though, at the same time. Because it's not just Jack's problem, it's everybody's problem. We're all going to be there at some point, my friends. We're all going to be at that point. So we need to constantly think about that as a way to get to that.
One last thing, Bill. You just mentioned you cut 320.
Yes.
And then at the beginning, you mentioned, remember, these numbers are fluid. I think if you stay tuned over the next several weeks, you will see that number come down, expand negative even more, and not like by $6.22, but by something rather substantial. And I agree with you, wait until the number comes in and it's in writing.
We want to be sure that the numbers are correct, because there could be other fluctuating numbers as well that we don't know of even at this point. So we're waiting to see a little bit where that goes.
Bill, just to make it clear, I'm not criticizing you as an individual or any of that.
I don't receive it.
I just see too many of my neighbors and friends who are having the problems that I mean, personally, it's not an issue to me, but it is to many people in town. And that's why I think they need a voice.
Yeah, I understand.
And I haven't seen that voice. If it's heard, it's not acted upon. And that's why.
I appreciate that.
Hopefully they'll make it to
All
town
right,
meeting.
I want to thank you all for being here tonight. My goal was to try and get you out of here before 9, but I didn't make that goal, so I apologize for that. But thank you all.
Do some motions.
Yes, I'll make a motion from,
Motion for the selectmen to adjourn.
All those in favor?
Make a motion for AdCom to dissolve.
Sorry, all those in favor?
Yep.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. We're all adjourned.
I have a